Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight? Aha! Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at Canva.com.
Hello everyone and welcome to Haway The Podcast. It's Gav and you join us for our morning podcast as we're here once again to chat about Sunderland, and of course coming up at the weekend we've got a couple of games, so we thought we'd spend this time previewing those, looking back at the summer with our guest today, and of course transfers. There's loads going on in the world of Sunderland and they do plenty to keep us going, so nothing is off the table today. First up, we've got Bomber back with us. Hello mate.
Good morning mate, how you doing?
I'm very good, very good. Nice and early one this morning, isn't it? We're getting this in before even the birds have got up this morning. And also with us is a debutant on Haway The Podcast. It's Dom Shaw from the Northern Echo. Hello, mate.
Hello, mate. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, very good, very good. Now, like I said, it's the first time you've been on with us, and if people aren't aware of what you do, Dom, could you maybe just give them a little rundown of where they can find your stuff and on social media and all the rest of it?
Yeah, I know you've had Scott Wilson on. I think you've had him on pretty recently, haven't you? I work with Scott at the Northern Echo, so between us, obviously, we cover Sunderland. We run We Are Sunderland as well, which is kind of like our sister site. We have the We Are Sunderland podcast YouTube channel. I don't know whether you've seen us on there. So yeah, it's been a great. I mean, I know we're going to get into it, but it's been a fascinating summer, hasn't it? We'll chat about it at length, but it's really surprised me for a number of reasons, and it's so intriguing going into the season now for so many reasons, isn't it? Exciting as well, intriguing and exciting in a positive sense, obviously.
Yeah, and obviously you said you cover off Sunderland, but you also cover off the other two northeast clubs, don't you? Newcastle and Middlesbrough. So that gives you kind of, I guess, it must give you quite like a wider perspective on all of this, because you're not just keeping an eye on Sunderland, you keep an eye on the other two teams, and then seeing the differences and how the respective summers are. I mean, we had Keith Downey on last week from Sky, and he was telling us, like, at that level, Sky just aren't that interested in Middlesbrough, and it's difficult for him to get there and do stories and stuff. But for you, your newspapers are going out every day, mainly in that area, right, in Teesside, Darlington, and then coming up to the rest of the northeast. So, you're covering off every club. So what's it been like in terms of, balancing Sunderland with Newcastle and Borough?
It's funny because we do cover every club, and yesterday, so we're recording on Thursday morning, obviously yesterday was one of those days where stuff was happening with all three clubs, and it was manic. There was kind of stuff developing, progressing all day with all three clubs. But in the summer, you will have days where, and it's mainly been Sunderland this summer, where Sunderland have been busy and stuff's been happening, and you feel like for 2 or 3 days all you're doing is writing about Sunderland, and then you look and you haven't really done anything with Borough, or you haven't done anything with Newcastle, and then it can work the other way. But what I think's interesting is 12 months ago, myself and Scott, in the various pods and stuff we do, and we do a Borough one as well, we were talking 12 months ago about how everything seemed to be in place at Borough. Everyone was pulling in the same direction. The squad was where it wanted to be. We fancied them for top 2. Sunderland, it had been a shambolic end to the previous season. The wait for a manager had gone on for God knows how long. We questioned whether the bosses knew what they were doing. We were talking about the strikers again and who was going to play up front. And yet, how things played out. And here we are 12 months down the line. And we've said this, and I've talked to people at the club about it this summer, just how different it feels. I actually think, and I've said it on countless occasions, I think Sunderland did a great job last summer on the back of what was a dismal season, wasn't it? Or a dismal second half of the season. Yeah. And I think what was so damning at the end of that season was it wasn't so much anger, it was more apathy, wasn't it, in the stands, which is always a dangerous game, I think. But I think Sunderland did a great job last summer of just freshening everything up, and not just the head. Clearly you need results, and the fact they got off to a good start helped, but not just the head coach and the transfers, but the club shop. I thought Hummel did a class job of the kit.
Yeah.
Everything felt fresh and new, didn't it, come the start of the season? And we'd all forgotten about Michael Beale and Matty Rigg, or whatever he called him, and the nightmare of the months before, hadn't we? So, yeah, let's see how it plays out. But this summer's been very, very different for Sunderland.
It has, and you mentioned the off the field stuff. Then first thing that came to mind when you said that was the hire of David Bruce. Made a massive difference and has made and continues to make a massive difference. I think there was, sometimes, and you'll probably know this from covering all the clubs, but sometimes you do have to experience extreme lows to get those highs, or at least build back up. And I almost think that really bad end of the season we had, making a bad head coach hire in Michael Beale, the stuff that went on with the Newcastle game with the Black Cats bar, which it might seem inconsequential to people outside the Sunderland bubble, but it really did lend to some really bad feel. I mean, people were really angry about that. I was one of them. And, a lot of people were really disappointed in the owner and all these other things. And it kind of, I think it made them reassess what they needed the club to be and what the image of the club needed to be, not just to the wider public, but to the fans. And you're right, I think that kind of last season that totally changed. And just to come to you on that, Bomber, but you can hardly believe that was only just over 12 months ago, all that. Like, it's mad, isn't it? Like, the amount of change. I was at the stadium last week looking at the renovation work. I was invited down, and just all these little touches have came together over the last 12 months. And it all adds to this feeling that the club is going places. And you've got to give them credit for the way that they kind of held their hands up and went, yeah, we made mistakes and we're going to try and change this round.
Yeah, for as much criticism as they received kind of 12 to 24 months ago, and some of it was justifiably so, they need 3-4 times that in praise for what the turnaround and what's happened both on and off the pitch. They say in the last 12 months, the results, obviously the outcomes, but like you said, those little touches as well are in and around the stadium. Just like you and the fact that the social media team at the club are doing such a good job, and it's not just about the match day stuff and the training stuff and the behind the scenes. They're publicising all these tiny little changes, and as lovers and supporters of the football club, it's those tiny little changes that show us that the people who run our football club actually care. Because it would be easy just for them to just focus on things on the pitch, make a few signings, sack fire and hire managers, and just really look at that side of things. But it does show that the care and attention has been made, is continuing to be made, and this first season back in the Premier League for 7 years, 8 years, it's going to be massive for us as fans, and it's nice to see that the club appreciate that and know what this is going to mean. Like when we start filtering into the stadium alight on the 16th to come up against West Ham, at 2:00, 1:45, people are going to be walking into the stadium like some people for the first time, because some people wouldn't have gone to the friendlies, and they'll be looking around going, yeah, this feels Premier League now, and all that will build into the good feeling and the atmosphere. And hopefully help us get off to as good a start as possible, because that's equally one of the most important things, that we get off to some sort of start in those first few games, particularly at home.
Yeah, and I guess for you, Don, the club have probably made your job. I'm guessing you've been very, very busy, but they've made it quite easy too. It's nice to report on big transfer stories, big breaking news on contracts, on the promotion, for instance, all these things. Like, that's, I guess in your role, that's what you want to be doing, isn't it? Is reporting on like a successful Sunderland team.
Yeah, I always say this. I think you reporters sometimes get a reputation for, kind of being bloodthirsty hacks who are always after the bad news. And yet our job, no matter who you're covering, is made so much easier when the teams you're covering are doing well. And come the end of the season, you probably are ready for a bit of a break. I think we all are as fans as well, aren't we? Like you can be drained by the ups and downs, especially of a championship season, and especially of a promotion running and kind of all. It was different for Sunderland because we were almost all able to switch off for a month or so, weren't we? Although it just kind of added to the anxiety, really, because of the way the regular season finished, I think. But come the end of the season, you're ready for a bit of a break. But then within a week or two, you're left thinking like, sugar, what do we write about now? We've still got to fill the paper. We've still got to write however many stories online every day. Whereas with Sunderland, obviously there was the 3-4 weeks extension into the playoffs. Then the celebrations and everything that followed that. And then where Sunderland were really great was we spoke to Christian Speakman early in the summer. He set out the plans for the summer, how they wanted to do things, talked about kind of scaling up across the club. And at that stage, words are cheap, aren't they? You've got to take someone like that at their word, but you always think, well, you report what they're saying, but let's see what happens next. Well, everyone at Sunderland have been true to the word, haven't they? And the signings, there's been a steady flow of exciting signings, a steady flow of good news, and it's still happening now, isn't it? Obviously, Gui signed last night. The Mayenda contract stuff is going to be confirmed. It might well have been confirmed by the time this goes out. It just feels like they've spent the whole summer with the house in order, really. And just quickly to circle back, you mentioned David Bruce there. I think he's been great as well, really good, because I sat down with him at the academy early on when he came in. And obviously he's a Sunderland fan, and he talked a lot about kind of tapping into his knowledge of the club and love of the club. But he came from the MLS, obviously, where things are so grand, aren't they? And a lot of the things that he talked about, I thought they're great ideas, really great ideas, really good on paper. But how doable are these things to put into practice? And yet, really, the vast majority, if not all, that he's done has turned to gold so far, I think, hasn't it? I think it's all helped, just to tap into what Bomber was saying there about this feeling that, like, everyone at the club gets it. Everyone at the club gets what it means to be at Sunderland, a Sunderland supporter, a Sunderland player, a Sunderland staff member, which undoubtedly helped last year. Le Bris talks about the connection and the unity and the togetherness at every possible opportunity, doesn't he?
Yeah. Well, just on Le Bris, how do you find him? I don't know how much interaction you've had with him over the last year or so, but he is like I wouldn't say he's particularly outgoing in terms, he won't come out and sort of splurge a load of information and give you a million headlines to write. But I find him a very interesting bloke, because he's very different to anything that, like, Sunderland, we said this kind of a year ago on our podcast when we were saying, like, typically the type of manager that works at Sunderland is a brash, outgoing, speaks their mind, typically northern type, You think of the ones we've had that have done well over recent sort of decades, they've all kind of fit the same profile. He's very, very different, yet I can't imagine now a Sunderland head coach that isn't Régis Le Bris. I absolutely love him, and when they gave him that new contract the other day, I was over the moon, because I'm thinking, thank God, because he should be our manager for the next 10 years. Like, that's what I want. I want to see Sunderland stick by this bloke and let him run with what because he's clearly good at what he does. I just, having dealt with so many managers over the years, where does he sort of rank in terms of, like, personalities and things you've spoken to?
Well, just quickly, I was chuffed with the new contract as well, because Scott, our colleague Scott Wilson, he wrote a piece very early in the summer saying what Sunderland can't do is sack Régis Le Bris in October if they get off to a bad start in the Premier League. Now, clearly, that was before we'd sat down with anyone and found out the vision and the plan moving forward. And now we know that there is absolutely no chance of that happening. But I've just been immensely impressed with how understated Le Bris is. So we've dealt with, like, Tony Mowbray. I dealt with Neil Warnock at Middlesbrough, who, will give you absolute gold in terms of copy off the record. They'll answer the phone. They'll fill you in on everything. They'll give you reams and reams and reams of quotes. Le Bris isn't like that, clearly, but he never ever shirks a question, does he? And I just think he's so ruthless, and I think we've seen it this summer, really, with the type of signings that have been made and the fact Anthony Patterson now has competition, Dan Neil now has competition, Patrick Roberts. His ruthlessness throughout has been impressive. And I'll be honest, when he first came in, and I saw him down on the touchline in a couple of pre-season friendlies last summer, I thought, I'm not sure this fella has the aura of being a leading manager. And yet, when you get to know him, you quickly realise that and Dennis Sirkin told me this when I sat down to do an interview with him at the academy before the playoff final. I think he said for the first week or two, he didn't say anything. He just watched. And the players were all kind of slightly unnerved by it. But what they found out was when he was watching and listening, he was really watching and listening. And then when it came to sit down with the players, Sirkin said he knew everything. He knew everything about me. And I think he instantly got the players' respect with that. That is vast knowledge. By all accounts, his work ethic, even when an away game and they've travelled the night before the game, he's in the hotel on his laptop or whatever, kind of studying the opponents or future opponents, never ever switches off. And it was a masterstroke appointing him, wasn't it? Let's be honest, I'll be first to admit, when he was appointed last year, barely heard of him, knew nothing of him, thought, this stinks of a gamble. What is he, 6th or 7th choice? But it's been an absolute masterstroke, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And as we said there, Bomber, it gets to October time, November time. Even, when you look at some of the fixtures we've got over the sort of winter, it's going to be tough, innit? And I think collectively as a fan base, we have to decide, look, we know it's going to be tough. It ain't going to be an easy ride this year. We're going to lose a lot of games of football in the Premier League. We're not going to go... over the last 8 years, we've not lost a lot of football games. When you look at over the span of it, we've won the majority of the games we've played in. So we've kind of gotten rid of that feeling of what it's like to lose all the time. And nobody likes losing. But when that happens, straight away, what happens? People are pointing fingers. They're looking for somebody to blame. They're looking for answers how to put it right. And I just think collectively we've got to accept it's going to happen. But if you trust the man in charge, you can't just trust him for now. You've got to trust him over the next 6, 8, 12, 18, 24 months. Yeah. And I honestly think, regardless of what happens this season, we've got the right man in the dugout and we've got to stick by him. And that means pulling our big boy pants up at times and saying, look, just get on with it. He's clearly the right man for the job. And yeah, if we lose every single game next season, it's going to be tough for me to sit there and say that, do you know what I mean? But
yeah,
you get what I'm saying, right? I think we've got the right man in charge and I think everybody knows that. And that's not going to change based on a season in the Premier League. I think he's done such an amazing job to get us to the Premier League. At the very start of this podcast, we were talking about how crap the year before was. A lot of that was because of how unbelievably detailed this man is. He changed this club around, and I just hope everybody sticks by him.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing. We all need to take a step back and look at a little bit kind of higher level and bigger picture here. Because like you said, over the last 6 years, we've not really lost that too many games. Certainly not by comparison to the previous seasons when we were fighting relegation in the Premier League each season in, season out. But I think it's a brilliant statement to be made by the club and a brilliant piece of timing. 2 weeks before the season starts, or not even that now. 8 days before the season starts, to give him a new longer term contract just is a bold statement by the club that says this man isn't going to go anywhere, and it almost forces our hand as fans to realise that he's going to be in it for the long haul. So we need to get behind him. We need to get behind the team. And it almost forces us to have that conversation with ourselves to think, okay, well, what's going to actually happen this season? It's not going to be a case of, we lose 3 of the first 4 games in September through into August and September. And then all of a sudden he's under pressure. We're going to need to be realistic with our expectations, and we're going to need to reconsider what our expectations are. And let's not forget that there's going to be a whole generation, essentially, of Sunderland fans who've never seen us in the Premier League or don't remember seeing us in the Premier League, who've only known us finishing in the top half of divisions last season aside. Playoff runs of 5 of the 7 seasons we've been out of the league, or 6 of the 7 seasons we've been out of the league. So now coming into the Premier League and the glitz and the glamour of it, and obviously that excitement from the playoff final has come through and has carried on through into this season. It's important that we don't get carried away. Be excited, of course, be excited, be enthusiastic, be supportive, but also be realistic in our expectations. Like you said, it's a 38 game season. We're probably going to lose, 15, 20 of those games. In reality, if we do better than that, fantastic, and we'll stay up, and it won't be an issue. Relegation won't necessarily be spoken of, but let's just be realistic about it. And also for Régis Le Bris himself, he's probably coming in. I know they would likely have had discussions. It's not like they just plonked something on his table yesterday morning and it's been signed. But like you said, words can be cheap. So it's for him to actually have that contract in front of him and signed it, and it's been announced and the club have made a fanfare about it, gives him that sense of security to think, okay, well, I can really knuckle down now and do what I want to do and help impose my vision on this football team without fear that if it does go wrong in the first couple of months of the season, I'm going to need to drastically change things. Otherwise, I'm going to be out of a job. So from his point of view, it's probably very, very reassuring and very much a confidence builder for him. But just to come back briefly to what we were talking about, I mean, when we were looking for a replacement and everyone was fuming that we'd missed out on Will Steele or that he turned us down, and like you said, Régis Le Bris was fifth, sixth choice. I mean, it's easy to say in hindsight, but I look back at it now and just so thankful that we missed out on everybody else and ended up with him. He's like so cerebral and like you said, so it's just even with what he says, when he says, how he answers questions, like you said, Dom, he doesn't shirk a question, but he's very, very tactical in how he answers it. And it's refreshing to see as a Sunderland fan, and I hope we see it for years more to come.
I think as well, Dom, over the last sort of, particularly since Kyril Louis-Dreyfus came in as owner, there's been a lot of reflecting on kind of things we've done in the past, what we got wrong, making sure we don't do it again. And that, I actually think that's a big reason why we got promoted, because they kind of looked at the sort of the scattergun approach that Ellis Short had in hiring and firing managers, no real transfer policy, spending money on players with no resale value, all these things, we could spend all day going through what we've done and kind of gone, right, let's not do that again. But I think that still applies. That should always apply. That should always be the kind of undercurrent to whatever Sunderland do, is that we, in another breath, we could have went in administration. We could have went out of business. We could have really, really suffered. And we did suffer, but we could have suffered even more had we not, been a bit lucky, I guess. You look at some of the other clubs in the AFL even now, Chef Wed being one, and you think, Jesus, imagine that could have been us. So that has to kind of, for me anyways, that has to pervade our thoughts at all times, and think, we're now in the Premier League, we've got back there, it's took us 8 years, it's been a long journey, but what we can't do is approach things in the way that we did last time we were there, which was at the first sign of trouble, the manager got sacked. We bring in another manager just to keep us up, because all you're doing is kicking the can down the road. You're just piling the problems up for somebody else. And eventually, the weight of those problems is going to crush you. And that's what happened with us last time. And I just think, we've talked a lot about sticking by Le Bris and all that, but the club is so well run now. Everything's done with a purpose. Everything has meaning. Everything's done with the club's best interests in heart. And I just think that means sort of sticking to your guns and kind of, we know I think we're all well versed in what we stand for now as Sunderland supporters, and even wider than that. You look at Sunderland as a football club and you think, I know what that club stands for. It stands for, developing young players. It's got an identity that links in with the fans and the wider, the city and the people of Sunderland and things like that. And all these things matter. And it means that when it gets going this season, and like I said before, when we do lose games of football, we can't go back to that old way of thinking, which was just sack the manager, get rid of him, he's shite, he does this wrong, he does that wrong, blah, blah, blah. All those things are going to happen. I really do believe that we collectively have to stay strong this year.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think the ownership group really and all concerned deserve immense credit for first of all, the plan, the model, the plan, because it's worked, but also showing some flexibility, because last summer, for example, the signings of Chris Meffam and Alan Brown. Alan Brown didn't play an awful lot of football, but at every opportunity, Le Bris talked about just how important he was behind the scenes. Two years ago, there is no way Sunderland would have signed Alan Brown as a free agent in midfield. But I think they realised that they needed a bit more nous, a bit more leadership, a bit more experience. We've seen it again this summer, haven't we? The likes of Adingra, Talbi, Siddiqui, Diarra, they're the exact type of players, the profile of players that I expected Sunderland to sign at the start of the summer. All the kind of suggestions were there will be 4 or 5 more of in the Lafay profile. That sort of fee, that sort of stage of the career. The thought is they're going to have the best years ahead of them. They all tick those boxes. But the signings of Ronaldo and Granit Xhaka show that Sunderland still completely realise that they need to have the right balance there. And in terms of the plan moving forward, well, the suggestions, the kind of conversations we've had this summer are very much that Sunderland have a 4 or 5 year plan, and that 4 or 5 year plan is to be a top half Premier League club, pushing on for European competitions or whatever in 5 years' time. Don't lose sight of that. Now that doesn't mean that in one of those next 5 years you're going to be playing Championship football again. Sunderland might go down this season, but if they stick to the guns, like you're saying, and they do everything right, then they're going to be in a much stronger and better position to not just bounce back at the first time of asking, but then to stay there the next time they're there. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. And I think Sunderland, I'm sure we can get into it, but I think Sunderland have given themselves a right shot at staying up. Clearly we'll know more in a month's time or 2 months' time, but I think they've given themselves a right shot at it. But like you say, I think the mindset has to be, we are going to lose games. And when I remember covering Middlesbrough in the Premier League a few years ago when they got promoted, and then obviously Borough and Sunderland went down the same year. And what I very quickly realised in that season was just how important every single win is. You might only win 1 game a month, but that win is huge. And if you're getting 4 points, 5 points every month and just keeping ticking over that tally, then you're keeping the Wolves from the door, aren't you? And you keep them 3 teams below you. If Sunderland can finish 17th this year, then what a position they're going to be in to kick on next year and move forward. You look at like what Nottingham Forest have done. I know we're going back a few years, but we're looking at what Brentford and Brighton have done. And how often have we heard Brentford and Brighton lauded for their transfer models and teams talking about how we want to be the next Brentford or Brighton? Well, let's look at what Sunderland have done. Why won't teams in the Championship in 2 years be looking and saying, why can't we do what Sunderland have done? They didn't throw huge fees at players in the Championship. They were shrewd. They had a long-term vision. They had a long-term plan. They stuck to the guns. They were flexible when they needed to be. If we're having those conversations in a couple of years' time, then Sunderland have done exactly what you've said there. They've stuck to the guns. They haven't cracked under the pressure, and I don't think they will.
No, and I also think another thing to reflect on, Bomber, is again talking about the past. Ellis Short would make decisions based on the way the fan base reflects in. If the fans were against the manager, he would sack a manager. If a player, Tom White told a story, didn't he, on the pod earlier in the week about how there was a player the sporting director and the manager wanted rid of, and Ellis Short, because this player got man of the match, went in the Montgomery suite after the game and promised all the fans he would have a new contract. And just he would based on what the manager would, based on what the fan base were thinking at that time, he would flex, and that isn't a good way to operate. And I honestly think if you look back, really in the last 4 years, 5 years, like Speakman and Kyril Louis-Dreyfus, they haven't really bowed to fan pressure all that often. They have stuck to their guns. So I guess it is reassuring in a way that whilst hyper emotional football fans, as we all are, can occasionally get carried away and make big statements and want big change because we're worrying. And, I'm sure at a point in this transfer window, there's going to be people absolutely losing their minds because we haven't got a certain player in by, a certain time or whatever. It's going to happen, and it does happen, and I accept that. But it does reassure me that Kyril and Christian Speakman and possibly Gasolfi, I imagine he's along the same lines as these two. They don't panic that often. They are very cool people, and that's going to be key this season.
Yeah, I mean we've seen that many times already in the short time, relatively short time that they've been that Louis-Dreyfus has been owning the club and Speakman's been running things behind the scenes. I think there was definitely a learning curve for them because there were certain things that the fans were crying out for that they didn't listen to, that they probably should have. And most of that will be on kind of the commercial side, the kit side, those sorts of things, and fan experience as well. Because when they first came in, it probably wasn't a priority at the time. The priority was on the pitch stuff and the training ground. But, there were certain things that were being cried out for and were largely ignored. And some of that probably seeded some of the anger and the fume that was directed towards Speakman when we had, failed playoff campaigns. We, transposed that frustration that we had about the commercial side, about the shop, about ticketing, about everything else. That bore out to our frustrations at what was going on the pitch. But they have learned and they have grown. And I think now that they've got a better stock of the club and we are where we are, they've identified where fans can have an influence, like on the kits, like on the what we want to see from our match day experience. But on the football side, it's completely the opposite to everything that you've just said about Ellis Short. There were times, and social media doesn't help on this, but there were times on social media where it was like fume about Régis Le Bris, that he should be sacked, that this, that, and the other. So and so player shouldn't be playing. So and so player should be playing here, there, or everywhere. And they just didn't listen to that. Probably didn't even read it. So completely oblivious to it. And that's how it should be. As fans, we all want the club to do well. And everyone has our opinions. We're all armchair managers. But they're in place and they've got to where they've got to for a reason. And whilst we have our opinions, they shouldn't necessarily be listened to, because there are people who are very, very successful at what they do and are paid to make those decisions. So it's easy, like you said, it's easy to sway to fan popularity or bow to things that we think that the fans want, but very rarely do those sorts of things work out, as we've found out firsthand. So yeah, I'd much rather have an opinion and have it not listened to and go, do you know what, that's great, but actually we're going to do it how we want to do it, and end up in the Premier League and end up in the top half of the Premier League. Give me that all day.
I think the prime example of that was that back end of that 23-24 season when that is right, isn't it? Yeah, the Beale, and after Beale had gone and Dodds came in, and obviously that was tough for Dodds, and there was a certain noise, wasn't there? Not just from the fans, but from us as reporters and the media as well, as you get a manager in now. This slide, you need to stop this slide now. Why not get a manager in now with 10 games to go or half a dozen games to go and give him chance to look at the squad he's dealing with? And then into the summer, how long did it drag on? We had a countdown. We had I remember on the pods we were doing every week, we had a daily count of how many days we were into the summer now, how many days since Sunderland last had a manager. And on a weekly basis, we were starting to question, do they know what they're doing here? They've missed out on X, they've missed out on Y. Who are they turning to now? Do they know X was being linked, Frank Lampard was being linked? Do they know what they're doing here? Have they lost sight of the plan? When in actual fact, yes, they very much did. There was reasons why they had to wait for Le Bris. But like you said, they didn't bow to the growing pressure. They just stuck to the guns. But we probably don't want to be blocked out, but that's what they did, didn't they? And it's worked. It was the right thing to do.
Yeah, perfect example, isn't it?
Yeah, I think as well when we're talking about sort of them having basically they've got a lot of change in the bank, haven't they? They've kind of that was a big call to wait as long as they did, bring in a manager, and then he gets us promoted. I mean, Christian Speakman, he's got a fag on after that, and he just lies back, puts his feet up, says, "Told you so," and that's going to be I think that's going to be key this summer, because so uncharacteristically for this sporting director and for this owner, we've actually been really proactive when it comes to transfers. I think this was something Tom White said earlier in the week when he said, they must have looked at the fixtures and went, actually, we need to get a lot of business done early because there's a chance to get some points here in August. And I can completely see that. But on top of that, at the minute, I'm getting a bit tetchy because I want 2 centre-halves in at least one. We're all looking at it and going, Sealt's not played a lot of football. Is he even fit? O'Nine's injured, Helder's injured, Ellis is injured, Sirkin's injured. and we're like a week away from the Premier League starting, and I'm a bit like nervous because we haven't got a centre half in. But then, having said what I've just said about everything, this is what they do: they wait. They wait until I'm sure they've got a number of targets in that position. But if those top targets aren't quite yet ready to move, they're going to wait, even if it takes another couple of weeks. Because what they won't do is go and panic and go, one of the lads in our group chat, bless him, he was like, should we just get Mepham back on loan? Mm-hmm. And I was like, no, because that's the complete opposite of the way they do things. They don't do it that way anymore. They wait, and it might cost us. I don't know. I can't imagine it will. But we've got to try our best and make sure that we don't panic. And if we don't panic, then we'll get what we want in the end,
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's crucial. You, like you say, there are clubs out there, aren't there, who would have got to this stage and thought, we're 8 days away, a week away, whatever. Let's just go and sign Chris Mepham. But then a week down the line, what if your top target then becomes available again, or the player that certain deals will always rumble until last. I mean, I don't like the fact that the window is 2 weeks after the start of the new season. I think that's a shambles in itself. Doesn't help anyone, does it? Certain deals will always rumble on until very, very late in the window. But then I think also that it's just human nature, isn't it? As football fans, we always want that little bit more. I mean, centre half. Sunderland desperately need a centre half, don't they? For all that they've done an awful lot of good work, they desperately need a central defender. But like you say, they don't just want a central defender. They want the right one, and clearly they're willing to wait to get him.
Yeah. Are you panicking yet, Bomber? I am tetchy, but I really want us to get the right defender. You see the again. I think I've referenced that Tom White pod about 20 times now. But Tom was saying, in terms of concrete links, the only name he could give us was John Lusumi from Bologna, and that's not going away. And the club clearly like him. And there must be something in it. There must be they wouldn't be hanging on and keep waiting for this lad to potentially come available if they didn't think there was a chance they could sign him. So I am clinging to that too, because in a month's time, if we've got John Lusumi through the door and he's quality and he's the difference between us, staying up and going down, nobody's going to give a shit that it took an extra couple of weeks to get him in, are they?
No, exactly. And like Dom suggested, we seem to be at a point now where we're not just moving on because we've got turned away the first time we've knocked at the door. And we don't seem to be moving away from targets unless it really is dead in the water and there's no point in pursuing it and you're just kicking a dead horse, which is refreshing because, like you said, it would be easy for us to put in a bid for John Lusumi, let's say. They go, no, we're not interested. He's not available. And we go, oh, okay then. Chris, fancy coming back next year? So it is really refreshing, and that builds my confidence. And for that reason, Gav, to answer your question, I'm not nervous about it. I think there still will be probably two centre halves that come in one before the start of the season, but another before the end of the transfer window. The only thing that concerns me a little bit is that obviously the closer we get to that West Ham game, the less time that new centre back, who, for all intents and purposes, we're going to be signing somebody to come in, start straight away, and be one of our Premier League centre backs. The closer it gets to the West Ham game, the less time they'll have to kind of bed in. And we know with like Ronaldo, for example, that he signed and we didn't see him for 4 weeks. Admittedly, he was at the Club World Cup, so probably had some rest and relaxation probably. But what I don't necessarily want to do is sign somebody on the Wednesday and we're playing West Ham on the Saturday, and then they have to. There's then that dilemma as to whether or not you throw them in on 3 days' notice, whether that's going to be conducive for a good performance and a good result, or whether you then stick to what's got you through pre-season. But I'm still confident. I think I said on one of the preview pods last week, maybe the week before, they've done the powers that be have done so much good work since the playoff final, and actually before the playoff run, that they've got so much credit in the bank with me that I'm fully confident they know what they're doing. And like some of the transfers that have happened this season already, a name will appear like at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning and then by 3 o'clock there's a scarf pic of them, and it'll be a link of someone that we've never heard of. But I take your point with the John Lucimi thing. I think with that must be our number one priority at centre back. But I think there's probably a couple of other irons in the fire, and we'll only hear from them once they've signed, or once Fabrizio Romano says that they're flying in for their medical. So yeah, I'm not worried. I'm not worried at this stage.
Yeah, Romano's been busy, hasn't he? Me and Scott were saying a couple of weeks ago, where was he when Isaac Lee Hadji was signing and Abdullah Bar was signing 2 years ago? Jumping on the bandwagon when things are ticking along nicely.
It's true. No, where do you see the next Here We Go coming from then, Dom? What you expecting Sunderland to do in the next couple of weeks?
Like Bomber says there, I think Sunderland's not all the time, because clearly there are times when names get out early. But I think there's been a few examples. So this Mark Gee, for example, we've known for a week, haven't we, that was going to happen. But there have been other signings this summer when, by the time the names have got out, and last summer as well, by the time the names have got out, the deal's been just about done. All right, there's been
goalkeeper's a perfect example.
Yeah, a few things to wrap up, but the deal's been just about there. Clearly, the Lusumi, they really like Lusumi. They want Lusumi. And as Bomber alluded to there, you wouldn't be sticking around if you didn't have an indication that there is a deal there to be done. Now, clearly, there is something that they haven't been able to agree on, and that's why nothing's happened yet. But again, if you were told categorically this is not going to happen, you move on, because this is a leading target, isn't it? A leading target in an area that they need to strengthen. I think, like you said, I think we're already getting to the stage where if you get a centre-half in, he might not play in that first game. Just because we know what Le Bris is like, and he's so demanding and he's so precise in what he wants from his players. I think if you haven't got a new signing in by Monday or Tuesday, he's not playing in that first game. But I'm not panicking. Clearly, you'd rather have a central defender in at this stage, but I'm not. They will get one, and I think they'll get one sooner rather than later. I think, as you say there, they'll probably get two. And what's going to be fascinating is in 4 or 5 weeks' time, what is Le Bris's strongest 11? What because we'll know them. We can all guess now. We can all speculate. But in 4 or 5 weeks' time, when I don't know, Sunderland are playing whoever they're playing, with 3 or 4 games beneath them already, what is the strongest 11? Who has established themselves already? Because there's various areas of the team where it's going to be really intriguing to see how it plays out, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually looking really forward to kind of just reflecting back on this summer, in a couple of weeks. Once the transfer window's shut, sitting back and going, God, look what we did. I mean, we're already doing that to a degree, but we're still living in it. And yeah, hopefully by the next time you join us, Dom, we'll have another 5 or 6 signings, Son, and we'll be in the top 6 of the Premier League. Yeah, we'll have a centre. We'll be in the top 6 of the Premier League. We'll be absolutely flying. You never know. But thank you very much for joining us, Dom. It's been great to chat and catch up.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, lads. Really enjoyed that. Thank you.
And thanks as always, Bomber. You'll be back at some point over the weekend, I'm guessing. You're never too far away, are you?
Imagine so, mate. Yeah. Pleasure as always,
Thank you to the listeners. As I've plugged a couple of times this week, we do have a new website, so if everything looks a bit different, over at rotoreport.sbnation.com, don't worry, we've just moved over to a new flashy-looking thing with a new feed section, which is a bit like social media, and it's easier to comment, there's less adverts, and the articles look a little bit nicer, so give it a go if you haven't already headed over to rotoreport.sbnation.com this week. Plenty to catch up on this week with the pods. We've had Tom White on this week. You've probably got sick of my voice because Chris is dead to go on holiday this week, and poor Martin's had a power cut over in Australia, so it's been me virtually every day. So hopefully I haven't scared you off. We've got games coming up at the weekend, so we will actually preview those games properly on Saturday morning. We were going to talk about it today, but then we just, waxed lyrical about Kyril and Speakman and Régis and all the rest of it, so it's been nice to separate those two out. So we'll be back with a preview pod tomorrow morning, so make sure you catch us then. We'll see you later.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.